This episode is sponsored by KMV Travel, a boutique travel agency that helps families plan personalized vacations and create unforgettable memories on land and at sea. Not only are their services 100% complimentary to guests, but there are some incredible offers that this team can help you take advantage of right now. From hello to see you real soon, KMV Travel provides the resources and support you need to have a stress-free vacation filled with magic, memories, and more. Listeners of this show can learn more and start planning your next vacation by visiting kmvtravel.com/skyway. Welcome aboard Imagination Skyway, your grand podcast tour of the magic. I'm your host, Matthew Krull, and in today's episode, we're going to continue our resort-focused series by discussing our first value resort and one of my personal favorites, Disney's Pop Century Resort. As a tribute to the popular fads of the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, Pop Century offers guests affordable accommodations as part of the official Disney Resort collection. The resort opened in 2003, originally planned to be half of a resort dedicated to the full 20th century, and you'll learn why the second half never opened in this episode. And it includes one standard room type with 4 location and view options, 3 pools, shopping, dining, and Disney Skyliner access, not to mention larger-than-life nods to popular catchphrases, toys, Disney movies, and music from the second half of the 1900s. In this episode, we discuss everything you need to know about staying at this value-level resort, share reasons why you might want to stay here, and offer suggestions about how to make the most of your stay. At the end of the show, we'll return to Imagination Central, where I'll share ways in which you can stay connected with Imagination Skyway, how you could discuss this topic with others, and how you can help support and inspire the future of this show. Please remain seated, keep your hands and arms inside the podcast at all times, and enjoy your Grand Circle tour aboard Imagination Skyway. We're continuing a series that we started a year ago where we've been focusing, highlighting on specific resorts across Walt Disney World. There are about 30 plus to get to, so there's a long list of episodes we can produce. We've done 2 so far. The first one was focused on Disney's Coronado Springs Resort, our first moderate resort and still my favorite. The next was a discussion about Disney's Animal Kingdom Lodge, focusing on both Jambo House and Kidani Village, our first deluxe resort, first Disney Vacation Club resort hotel as well. And today's discussion is going to be on one that's honestly very near and dear to my heart, which is going to be our first value resort in the series, all about Disney's Pop Century Resort. And just like the other 2 episodes, it didn't make sense to talk about this one by myself, but to have an experienced and amazing travel agent join us to talk all about it. So I want to welcome back Kelly Craig from KMV Travel. Kelly, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited about talking about Pop Century. It's also one of my favorites, so I think it's going to be a good discussion.
I think so too. This is the first time we are regrouping since we officially partnered together. So it's really nice to have us come together in what's going to be, I think, the first of many resort-focused episodes that we can produce. I already know we have at least one more plans for the spring, and I'll just leave it at that. But there's a lot for us to talk about with Pop Century. Before I have a couple of rapid fire questions before we dive into some of the specifics of the resort. But my first question is, do you remember, or first of all, have you stayed at Pop Century before? Because I sometimes assume everyone stayed everywhere, but
yes, many times. It is truly one of my favorites. So
yeah. Do you remember the first time you stayed there? What that experience was like for you?
I do. And funny story that we will definitely get into when we're talking about the resort. But there originally, of course, were going to be two sides of this resort.
Yes.
And we stayed there the first year that it was opening. So we booked it even before it had opened. And I remember the cast member, this was back in the day when, we'd call in to make our reservations right to Disney. And the cast member asked us which side of the resort we wanted. And thankfully, we said the side that was opened and not the side that never came to be. But yeah, it was a really fun resort. It was super fun to stay in, especially as a kid. So I have very fond memories of Pop Century with my mom and dad.
That's really great. A spoiler alert for our conversation. It is called Pop Century, and yet only 5 decades are represented out of 10. And there is a reason for that, which we'll talk about, as you said. But talking about that, so you picked the right side, which is good. Do you have a favorite decade or section in Pop Century?
I would have to say the 50s, just because there's the Lady and the Tramp statue, and my parents always had Cocker Spaniels growing up. So we had a dog named Lady Nessie, and that was after Lady and the Tramp. So I'm a close relationship there with that one.
Yeah, I should be answering these questions too, because I haven't talked about this before.
Yeah.
As a kid, I never stayed at any of the value resorts. And that was because when we were first in sort of I'd consider it to be the value category or value budget with my family when I was still young, we always stayed off property. My dad drove down with us, really learned a lot of patience when you are driving down from New York to Florida over the span of 1.5 days. And obviously kids today have so much entertainment. I had music and I had looking out the window, and that was about the extent of it. If I maybe brought a book in the car or something, but that was about it. So, we stayed off property and would drive onto property. And then we started staying on property. It, of course, one of the episodes we'll have to do, and one of my most nostalgic resorts was staying at Port Orleans Riverside, which back then was Dixie Landings and then became Port Orleans Riverside. And then when I started traveling to Disney by myself when I was a college student, and obviously my budget was less than what my family budget was when I was in middle school, high school, I would stay at the value resorts. So I stayed at All Star, I stayed at Pop Century, and then my first trip with Joanna, I think our first 3 or 4 trips together was at Pop Century. And so I have a lot of fond memories of us going and spending 10 days at Walt Disney World and staying at Pop Century. And it's a very special resort for me for that reason, not to the least of which is also because I think it's the best value resort on property, having stayed at most of them. But my favorite decade is the 80s section. I love the Rubik's Cube. 50s is a close second because I like going up the bowling pins, but I really like going up those Rubik's Cubes into the rooms and then just seeing, because I grew up I was born in the 80s. I don't remember the 80s very well, but I was born in the 80s. So I really like that theming and seeing some of the 80s films. It's also the Little Mermaid year. So like it's a decade. So there's just a lot of great aspects of the 80s section. But anyway, so that's my favorite. My last question for you in terms of the rapid fire questions is, we have, as I mentioned, several value resorts. You can consider the 3 All-Stars to be their own All-Star sports, movies, and music. You have Pop Century and then Art of Animation sort of encompassing this value resort category. So where does Pop Century lie on that list of favorite value resorts for you?
So I have stayed in all of them except for sports, which I feel like, I kind of get the feel of sports having stayed in the other All-Star.
It's similar, yeah.
Yeah,
just a different theme.
So yes, probably more sports groups that are staying there. But I think for me personally, I like Art of Animation just because of the amount of differences in, the family suite versus the standard room. But I also really like the price point for Pop Century. I think that's kind of like the sweet spot where Art of Animation is a little bit more expensive, and then Art of All-Star, you're going to be a little bit less expensive, but you don't have that Skyliner, and that Skyliner to me is well worth the additional cost. So Pop Century is probably where I would fall most. Art of Animation is where I probably have a lot of my families that stay, just because there's so many different categories of rooms that we can have there.
Yeah, and Art of Animation will be on our list. That's one of the resorts I've never stayed at. But that's when I was looking back in the day, it was between Art of Animation and Pop Century. My family wasn't, it was just two of us traveling as a couple, and we opted for the Pop Century side. It was just to your point, like the price point was right. The Skyliner wasn't there, but we also loved the theme. And if we really wanted to see Art of Animation, we could always just stroll on over across the Generation Bridge and head over to Art of Animation. So yeah, it's a really great resort. And that brings us into our discussion. So, and obviously it's my favorite value resort. I didn't answer that question. Just the ones I've stayed at, it's my favorite value resort compared to the all-star resorts I've stayed at. But, I think that this resort, it checks a lot of boxes for a lot of people. And we'll talk, just like we did in the other episodes, about some of the room categories, the history, the things to do with the resort, the transportation, dining options. We'll go through the list. But thinking overall about the resorts, what do you think makes Pop Century special or unique on property compared to the other resorts?
So I think when you look at it in terms of comparing it to a value or the other values, I really feel like Pop Century and Art of Animation are like value plus. So because of that Skyliner, that's going to be a huge benefit that you have. Also, the fact that you can walk across to each of those resorts, because like you said, they are going to be connected by the Generation Bridge across Hourglass Lake there. That means you have different options for more dining. So if you're staying at Pop Century, you can walk across and go to the food court over at Art of Animation. You're not going to be able to use their pools. That is going to be specific to the resorts, but there's a lot of different things that you can see at these different resorts. So if you're doing a resort day, a Pop Century, a Art of Animation is such a great option for that, because there's just going to be so much to do there. Also, being on the Skyliner, that means that you have easy access, of course, to the parks for EPCOT and Hollywood Studios, but you also have easy access to Riviera Resort as well as Caribbean Beach Resort, which both are going to have more dining options for you. Riviera Resort has an incredible pool bar, which I think is like a must do, and you don't need to have reservations for that. So there's just a lot that's going to be very easy for you to access at Pop Century. Plus, it's going to be just a little bit more themed probably than a all-star in terms of what's going to be all throughout the resort. So all-star, you're of course going to have that theming with the movies, music, and sports, but Pop Century, I think it really takes it like a second level up there.
Yeah, it does. There's definitely that connection to the Skyliner makes it a desirable value resort, and you're going to your point, be spending a little bit more than you are at All-Star, but I think the savings you get in time and in convenience of having the access to the Skyliner, that quick ride with the transfer over to Hollywood Studios, and then I think it's about 20 minutes from Pop Century, Art of Animation, Skyliner stop to EPCOT, with the transfer and then stopping at Riviera and then continuing on forward. So it's a little bit longer to get all the way to EPCOT, but still you have that convenience. You don't have to pack yourself into a bus. Obviously, the Skyliner can be a lot more comfortable when it comes to space and the open fresh air. So there's, and then if it is down for bad weather, of course they provide bus transportation. But I love the location of Pop Century. It's a few minutes away from All Star, so it's not that much farther, and yet it feels like it's closer to Disney. It is definitely closer to Disney Springs. It's not as close to Animal Kingdom as All Star. All Star has the convenience of being the closest one in a value resort to Animal Kingdom, but very easy to get to most places by bus. And then to your point, having that Skyliner access even to the boardwalk area and to Riviera. And it's just, there's a lot more that you can access without needing to drive somewhere or do a bus transfer. You just hop on that Skyliner and get to Sebastian's Bistro, Caribbean Beach, or Topolino's or Bar Riva at Riviera. And then I can't even name everything that's over at Boardwalk, Yacht Club, Beach Club, Swan, yes. Dolphin, Swan Reserve. There's a ton that's over there. So it's just really, really great to have that transportation that makes it great. And then I personally love the theme of it. I think it's just a fun theme. And I feel like everybody, we had two different answers. You sort of lean towards the 50s section. I lean towards the 80s section. But I think actually, now that I think about it, I've only stayed at all the times I've stayed there, it's been 80s, 90s, and 50s. I've never stayed at 60s or 70s. And I've stayed there enough times to technically go to all of them, but I feel like we always get placed in the 80s or the 90s, and once I got placed in the 50s, but never the 60s,
Yeah.
70s. And maybe
Did you
that's
ever do a
because those are
preferred room?
rooms. Yeah,
Yeah, I was
that's
gonna
why.
say. Yeah.
I just answered my own question as I was thinking about it. Those are preferred rooms. Yeah, we've never done the preferred room option, so that's
You'll
why
have
we
to do
always
that
get
next
those.
time then, I guess, right? So you
Yeah,
can check them all off your list.
exactly. But I also, one of the things that it's interesting how I talk a lot about sound. The previous episode we did was with Aaron Richard, who is on the music side of Imagineering. So, we talked a lot about how sound really encompasses the experience that you have at Disney. But one of the things that Joanna and I loved about this, or that we have these memories of, is just either sitting by the pool or sitting in the lobby or in the food court and listening to the music playing from all the decades from the 50s through the 90s, all these pop hits throughout those years. And we would sort of like collect in our own little playlist some of that music. So we would go and we'd drive somewhere together in the car and we'd play some of the music from Pop Century, and it would make us dream about our next trip back to Disney. We're playing things like, Enrique Iglesias, and like it was like really random things, people that you wouldn't associate with Disney. But the music loop here is just so much fun. Sort of that last day when we didn't have annual passes, we weren't paying for the park ticket, we're just hanging out at the resort waiting for the Magical Express back in the day, and we would listen to some of that music. It's such a fun little resort, and not one of the. It has enough rooms to it, but it's never been a resort to me that's felt very large to the point where, I remember if you're not in a preferred room, if you're in the 90s section, even the farthest room, you're going to get to the lobby in 3 to 4 minutes. It's not as large as a Caribbean Beach or a Coronado Springs, Old Key West, Saratoga Springs. Those are massive, sprawled out resorts. This one is big, but it's not so wide that it is inconvenient to get to the main part of the resort. So
Yeah, it's a lot less overwhelming, I think, especially when, even if you compare the values to each other. All Stars, because all 3 of them are right next to each other, they just feel a lot bigger, even though, technically they're very similar in size to Pop Century. But you're right, even if you're in the furthest room away, it's not going to be something that's not doable, even if you've got, a double stroller that you're trying to push. I get a lot of families that are concerned about, well, at the end of the day, after I get home on the bus, am I going to be, trudging to my room? It's not that terrible. And there's definitely, everything is well lit and everything like that. So I've stayed there by myself. I think Pop Century is a great option, especially for families that do have little ones, because you do have the Skyliner, which makes it so much easier. I will just continue to go back to the Skyliner all the time.
That does make it a lot easier for families, for sure. Now you talked about the first time you went, and back then you had the option to choose between 2 sides. And technically, I think when you probably selected which resort you were going to stay at, you were choosing between what was going to be called Disney's Pop Century Resort Classic Years and Disney's Pop Century Resort Legendary Years. And I mean, as the history of it goes, the spot that now houses or sits where Art of Animation sits was going to be the Legendary Years. And you can find some photos from online of construction for these like abandoned hotel, right? And they had this lobby that had the decades that were going to be featured in the front, just like Pop Century now has 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. You would see the aughts, 10s, 20s, 30s, and 40s. And that would have made it a true full century, where now it's just a half century. And that's because construction began on this resort in 1999. And then we had, because of the events of September 11, 2001, that serious downturn in the travel economy. Disney went through a really tough period in the early 2000s. It's why you see a lot of construction that happened in that time sort of scaling back the budget for what Disney could afford to create. And Disney did open that first half, which eventually just became Pop Century, in 2003. And they were planning to open the second half in 2007. And you, for a while, could actually see in those years across Hourglass Lake, the main building, as well as I think there were 2 or 3 buildings that were there that were going to be the 40s section. And then in 2005, Disney began testing family suites at All Star Music. That did prove to be really successful. So Disney decided to pivot to creating a family suite resort, and alongside it, creating a new theme, which that, of course, is Art of Animation. But they didn't want to demolish and recreate the two buildings they had already built. So those became the only section of the resort, which again was going to be the 1940s, but became the Little Mermaid section, the only section of the resort that has those traditional value rooms that look like Pop Centuries. And then the others were created to feature the family suites, which is a really interesting piece of resort history. There's been other resorts that Disney have come up with before, lots of concept art for other ideas, even with the original opening of Walt Disney World. But it's interesting to see that they actually started construction on something and then stopped it and pivoted in an entirely different direction. And obviously, Art of Animation has a really great sweet spot in the options that you have at Walt Disney World. But if you were to go back, and if the legendary years, and we would have sort of like Port Orleans Riverside, Port Orleans French Quarter, you would have Pop Century classic years, Pop Century legendary years. If you could have stayed in the legendary years section, which decade do you think would have interested you the most?
Oh, I think the 30s. And I think that the connection, again, I have to go back to the Skyliner. I swear I'm like a, broken record here, but think about like if you were staying in the 30s and then you went to Hollywood Studios and you're walking down Sunset Boulevard, it's just like this continuation of the story. So I think that would have been really cool.
That's a great answer. And you could probably feature some artwork and posters for the Hollywood Tower Hotel in its heyday back in the 1930s, and then in the 40s section you have an abandoned Tower of Terror or something in there. That's a great answer. And you have Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I'm sure that would have been featured in the 30s. I would pick the 20s. I think the Roaring 20s are a really fun time to look back on. The music of the 20s is so interesting. And that's where you see Walt really that's when the Walt Disney Company was established, some of the early shorts, and then the creation of Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse. So I think it would have been fun to have that featured in the Roaring 20s section. But honestly, all of them would have been very interesting. The only one I'm not sure how they would have done is like the teens, the 10s, the 1910 to 1919 era. It would have been interesting to see how they would play that, especially with this predates Disney history. So they would probably had to include some of Walt's childhood in that, his later years working in Kansas City, trying to start up Laugh-O-Grams and some of those really early Walt years. It would have been, since it predates Disney history, I'm just curious how they would have incorporated Disney into the 1900s, 1910s. That would have been interesting.
Yeah, because you do have a Disney statue in every building. Am I right about that? I feel like the only one I'm not sure about is the 90s. Do we have someone at the 90s? I think we do. Oh, yes. Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head. So,
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wonder what they would have done. Would they done like the Alice live action? Would they have had, it's like you never know what would have happened. It would have been kind of cool to see, though.
Yeah. And 40s would, of course, be interesting and fit with Hollywood studios, too. I like to think about what it would have been. Art of Animation is such a stronger fit, and families love it. I think it's one of the most popular resorts on property. So, and another one we'll cover for sure. So let's go through some of our typical questions about this resort and help those listening to, if they've never stayed at Pop Century Resort, get an idea of what the resort is like. And I want to start by asking, who would you say would most enjoy staying at this resort? Or as you were talking to families, who do you find is that perfect fit for Pop Century?
Yeah, so I think that with Pop Century, I see a lot more, with the opening of Art of Animation, you see a lot more families that are kind of going towards Art of Animation. And then you see a lot of couples that are going to Pop Century, or people that are, they're looking for the Skyliner opportunity, but they don't need the family suite. The one thing with Art of Animations that's difficult is that you only do have that one building or two buildings for the Little Mermaid, which is going to be the standard rooms. So that's where a lot lot of people will go to Pop Century. So Pop Century is actually a difficult one to book a lot of times because people are just kind of swarming over there, because it is a great price option for the amount of convenience, like you were saying, Matt, and just the location that you have of that. So a lot of families will look to go to Pop Century. I see a lot of people that are basically looking to keep the cost of their accommodations lower so that they can focus on things in the parks. So even families that are looking to do a VIP tour, a lot of times when they'll talk to me, they'll say, well, I want a budget for a VIP tour, but I want to stay at Pop Century because I know I have all these accommodations. I can get to where I need to go, but I really want to put my budget into the in-park experiences. So I'll see a lot of families that will do that. But I get a lot of honeymoons that are in Pop Century because it's a opportunity to stay on property, again with the convenience, but it's something that you can budget for a little bit easier than maybe doing a moderate or definitely a deluxe.
Oh, for sure. I totally agree with the while families can fit really well in Pop Century, you get so much more bang for your buck at Art of Animation, especially when you extend beyond 2 kids or you have older kids and they don't want to share a bed. Like it just having it's almost Art of Animation is almost like a mini DVC in a way. And those family suites, you really just get so many more people that you can accommodate into an area. And they're so strategic and so clever about how they arrange the space to accommodate those larger families. Pop Century does work really well. When I was a solo traveler, or the times I did go down there by myself, meet up with friends just to sort of like on a budget share, if I went down with one friend, like I get one bed, the other friend gets the other bed, we share that room and drive down the cost of our trip pretty significantly compared to if we stayed somewhere else, or if you're not going to be spending a lot of time in the room. Because I hear that a lot from families. Like my family, we love to splurge more on the resorts, especially now being DVC. But we've always appreciated having those more amenities. We do like to, especially bring the girls back to nap. Like there's just for us a lot more value in having different accommodations. But like I said, when we were young, and literally we just wake up, go to the parks, rope drop to close, come back, sleep, go back the next day, rope drop to close. It's just a place to lay your head at night, and you're going to get a lot more of, open up your budget a lot more to be able to, if you can and you want to spend more on dining or on tours or extra, these extras that you can get, dessert parties or lightning lane selections. Like you can just open up so much more to be able to do that. But I do like that sentiment of, especially for couples or solo travelers with friends or those who don't necessarily need all that extra space. It fits really well to stay there. So I'll definitely second that. I think this is a pretty simple question for Pop Century. It's not quite as elaborate as when we talked about Coronado Springs and Animal Kingdom Lodge, but the types of rooms that are available at Pop Century, obviously you have the different decades, but then beyond that, what are the room category options at Pop Century?
Yeah, so the nice thing about Pop Century is you can actually get pretty specific about the type of room that you want. So all the rooms are going to be the same in terms of you're going to have a queen bed and then a table bed that's going to come down. But the difference is that you have 4 different categories here. So you have a standard room, then you're going to have a standard room pool view. You have a preferred room and a preferred room pool view. So you can basically define what side of a building you're going to be on. And then with those preferred rooms, like Matt, you were saying before, that's going to be the 60s and 70s. So that's going to be 4 and 5 and 6 and 10. And if you do want to be closest to the Skyliner, that's going to be 4 and 5. So what you want to do, if that's something that's really important to you, is, when your travel advisor or when you do book that, you just have to call in and basically request that you be in those rooms. Disney can never guarantee those requests, but it is something that they take into account when they, define where people are going to be placed.
Yeah, that's so we having the 4 categories of rooms, but otherwise they're pretty much the same. Is a good way to think about it. Is just placement and view are the choices that you have. Otherwise, you're looking at the exact same room setup across the entire property. Exactly. And that's one of the ways they do obviously drive down the cost of these resorts is by sort of creating this homogeneous approach to its design, so that it's really easy. It's really cheaper construction. You're not playing as much Tetris with the size of the rooms. The design of it is much cheaper. So it just makes it better. And obviously with the main thing that separates a lot of the value and moderate resorts from the deluxe resorts, except for Art of Animation, is the hallways and access ways are all outside, as opposed to if you go to most of the deluxe resorts, they're going to be, except for like Old Key West and Saratoga Springs, they're going to be interior access ways and hallways with amenities and inside those hallways to get you to your room. So that also drives down the cost quite a bit. So very simple approach. Like I said, not much to talk about. We're not talking about different villa sizes and suite options. It's just the standard rooms and the different locations. Generally, I believe the pool view is the more expensive option between pool and standard, correct?
Yes. Yeah. So, which is a nice option to have if you have, older kids that you're kind of okay with them going to the pool. Like I know, at like 15 years old, my mom would still be like, well, I wanted to have an eye on them. So, but it's a good option to have, especially if you're going to be spending a lot of time at the pool. You can ask to be on that first floor. So it's easier access there. So I love the fact that you can get really specific about what type of room you have at Pop Century, even as a value.
Yeah. And you're totally right. So I was thinking like my girls are older. They want to go to the pool by themselves. We hang out back at the resort, like to be able to watch them from the pool, from our room, make sure everything's okay is worth that added cost when they're this young and we're not going to the pool without them. Having the fact that we can spend a little bit less for a standard quieter view, which is perfect for nap time, is so much better. So it all depends on that stage of life that you're in. Makes a huge difference. So besides that, we talked in the other episodes about what to do on a resort day, and value resorts, there's a reason they're value resorts, right? You're spending less because you're really just focusing on the room itself. There's not a lot of bells and whistles, not as many amenities as you're going to see in a lot of the other resort categories, but still you can make a great resort day at Pop Century. They have always at every single resort activities, they have the pools, they have just a lot that you can go and enjoy. So if someone does want to spend a resort day just relaxing at Pop Century, and that's where they decided to stay, what do you generally advise for things that someone can do on a resort day there?
So Pop Century, again, I think is such a great resort for a resort day. If you're going to be doing that, if you want to stay at the resort, there's 3 different pools. So you have the Hippy Dippy pool, and they have flower shaped water jets, which is kind of fun. Yeah. There's going to be a kiddie pool that's right behind that as well. And that's where they kind of that's their main pool. So they'll have the poolside activities, they'll have the movies under the stars. All that's going to kind of be in that area, plus Pedals Pool Bar if you are looking for that, which fun thing that I didn't know about Pedals Pool Bar, because this is new from when I've stayed there. They do trivia 4 nights a week. So
that's awesome.
If you're staying, right? I'm like that. Yeah. I feel like that's super fun for the adults, but also just to get the family involved. So something to look into. There's also the bowling pool. So I bet, Matt, you probably know this, but this bowling pool is the 10th of the bowling pins that are located around the resort. So you'll see 9, and then this is the 10th bowling pin.
Never thought about it, but boy, does that make sense.
Right? When you hear it, you're like, oh yeah, okay.
I knew it was bowling ball shaped, bowling pin shaped, but I didn't actually bother to count. I need to know more of the Imagineering of this resort. Every resort has got such clever details like that.
Yeah, it is interesting because you think of it as, it's a value. It's you're there to lay your head down, and then just the amount of thought and everything that goes into it. So I thought that was a kind of a cool piece of information there. So the last pool is the computer pool, and this is in the 1990s area. So these 2 pools are going to be a little bit smaller, but if you're staying in these areas, that's a great, you start at the 1990s pool and then you can hop over to the Hippy Dippy pool. That could be a whole day. And then you do have Everything Pop is their food court, as well as their shopping area, which is going to be attached to Classic Hall, which is the lobby. In the lobby, you do also have an arcade. That would be an additional cost if you do want to play in the arcade, but there's a lot of options there. They do campfire activities. If you are into running or just walking, there's jogging trails around there. Playgrounds in the 1970s section. And then also a cool thing that I found out for a family that I just recently had at Pop Century. I was looking for some things for them to do on their resort day. They have a groovy scavenger hunt that has you go through the icons of the decade. So basically, you go to the front desk and you ask for a map, and they're going to give you a map that looks kind of like if you've done, Remy's hide and squeak or things like that at Epcot. It'll look very similar to that. And there's going to be the icons at each of the buildings listed at the bottom of this map. And then you have to go around and you have to write in which icon is in each of these different locations. When you bring it back, you'll be able to pick a prize, and there's different pop century type of prizes. So there's a snap bracelet, there's a yo-yo, Rubik's Cube, things like that. So that's a fun way to kind of get to know your resort, plus have something to do when you're at the resort.
That's so clever. I love that. And it's your point. Like they always have so much that you can enjoy at these resorts, and that's why Kelly, you wrote a great article for Imagination Skyway recently about comparing the value of staying on property at a value resort compared to staying off property. And with the exception, of course, of those home rentals or Airbnbs, when you're comparing hotel to hotel, you get a lot more. You often spend less staying on property in a value resort compared to staying off property, which a lot of people don't realize, except for those exceptions. And you save the time. You're closer to. You have that access to complimentary transportation. You have, including here, the Skyliner, and then getting the early theme park entry. All those perks that come with it. But the big thing for me has always been to be in that Disney bubble and to have that cast member interaction at the resorts themselves, the Disney trivia, to your point, the scavenger hunts, the things that even if you're not going to be devoting your entire trip to the parks, there's so much that you can enjoy even at a value resort on property. And it's again goes back to the reasons why, like I do not stay off property. Like, as I just don't. I did it once recently, and I just don't want to do it again. And it was like a free week I got from family who had timeshare. They're like, "Oh, we'll give you a free week because we're not going to use it. Go stay in." And then the whole time we're there, we're like, we kind of just should have paid to stay on property because we miss it. We miss all the perks of being on property and not having to drive off property, deal with traffic at the end of the day, and get back to where we were, which wasn't even that far.
It's a very different vacation.
It certainly is. It's always a different vacation. So we already talked about actually one of the questions I was going to ask here, but let's jump to, we talked about pools, just talked about recreation. So let's go to dining. There's, when we talk about, again, Coronado Springs, it's probably most restaurants on property, Animal Kingdom Lodge, there's a lot of options. Pop Century doesn't immediately have a lot of options. We already talked about the fact that you really do have countless options for dining when you include the Skyliner access. But thinking just about property itself, there really is just two options. You have the everything pop shopping and dining. I've spent many days, so many memories of being there, and then the Petals Pool Bar. When it comes to dining, anything listeners should know about Pop Century or any favorites for you? Anything else you want to comment on when it comes to dining on property?
No favorites for me. I mean, I think that it's a great location. It's the one thing to think about with any of the resorts that you're staying at, breakfast time is going to be extremely busy because majority of people for lunch and dinner are probably eating at different locations throughout. You kind of spread people out. Breakfast is going to be a lot of people coming together right at once. So something that I recommend to all of my families is do grocery delivery, get that, brought to your resort. You just be there for pickup. And you can do this through an Amazon, an Instacart, anything like that. But that just having that breakfast in your room, you do have a fridge, will make it a lot easier for you to get everybody out in time for that rope drop, if you want to do that, but also will just cut down on a lot of hassle in the morning. But if you don't want to do that, maybe go the night before. They always have like bakery set up in there. Grab a few different things and then eat in your room so you can avoid it. That may be just the planner in me, but I feel like that just saves so much time on our trips when we are able to eat in the room and then just head to the bus or head to wherever we're going to go for the day.
Yeah, especially when we were just doing the rope drop to close strategy, like we were grab and go, just either grab something quickly from from pop shopping and dining, or grab something at the park after we've rope dropped and done a few attractions, or we bring something. We, especially back then, we didn't really do too much grocery delivery, but now having two kids, we have a larger need. We have more needs for feeding our family and giving them options. So it's a lot better to access that or have that available. But if you are going to be dining there, the hours are typically 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. And I remember some nights, like, I'd try to get back just in time. I was still hungry after a long day at the parks and just wanted something to eat at like 10:30 at night just before going to sleep. But if you are going to be doing rope drop to close, with the exception of some days, Animal Kingdom opens up at 7:30 in the morning. Like, if you're going to Magic Kingdom on a day that it opens at 9 and you have 8:30 early theme park entry, or you're going to Epcot, it opens at 9, you have 8:30 early theme park entry, you're going to be taking the Skyliner, like, get there at 7 a.m. If you're going to be doing the breakfast, finish that breakfast by 7:30, hop on the Skyliner, get there within that, 30 minutes by 8 a.m. to really rope drop. Remy's is right around the corner, so it's probably the place I would head to first if you're not going to do Lightning Lane. Or if you can sort of compete with those at the front of the park to get to Frozen Ever After, or Test Track, which is going to be difficult to do. Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewinds, you're looking at different options there. But yeah, it's get there at 7 a.m. And then, I always like the menu that they have here. I think that the options are plentiful enough. You get a nice little wide variety. The pricing is very fair at these resorts. One of the things that Joanna and I used to get all the time, I don't know why, it was like our go-to for the morning, was the Western omelet. They have a couple of omelet options on there that are just, they're $10.99 for the omelet. You could get a full like waffle bounty platter or pancake bounty platter that comes with either that Mickey shaped waffle or pancakes. Go with the Mickey shaped waffle if you're at Disney. Scrambled eggs, potato barrels, bacon and sausage. It's $12.79. And then for lunch and for dinner, you have lots of great options too. It's that, you go up to one of the counters and you can order a citrus basil salmon. It's $16.99. A mojo roasted chicken is $14.79. Beef and vegetable stir fry, $14.99. Sesame chicken, $12.29. Burgers are roughly $12 to $14 depending on what you get. Get hot dogs, sandwiches, pizzas, pastas, salads, soup of the day. They have, of course, plant-based options for breakfast and lunch and dinner, kids options, kids meals, and then all the grab and go stuff. So you just have like so much you could choose from, and you could do it all on a budget, whether or not you're on the quick service dining plan or the Disney dining plan. I've always found it's pretty easy to eat the quick service there and stay on a budget if that really is your option that you're looking at. So that covers dining, and the last major category we talk about is transportation. We've talked extensively about the Skyliner. I actually, the last time I stayed there was when the Skyliner was about to open. I have not stayed, and I remember seeing the construction of the Skyliner. I've not been back to stay there since before 2019. So that changes things dramatically, but I remember so many days just waiting out at that bus stop and maybe crossing the parking lot from the 80s and seeing all the way in the distance that Magic Kingdom bus, saying, oh no, I just missed it. But transportation is buses and Skyliner. When you stay there, how do you find the bus transportation to be? Because I know a lot of listeners will often ask about the ease or the convenience or the efficiency of bus transportation.
Yeah, I think this is the biggest concern that I get from my families that are staying at resorts that don't, aren't within walking distance or whatever it may be. But the thing to remember with this is, first, I think if you've stayed in an all-star before, you probably have an experience of, there's been a time where you've had shared buses. So they've gone to, sports, music, and movies. That's not going to happen at Pop Century. And if you are staying in an all-star, that's only happening on more off hours. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that. Disney is very good with their transportation, as anyone who has gone knows. They are going to make sure that they have the number of buses they need to get people to the parks on time. With that being said, I always recommend you're building in an hour of transportation to get anywhere that you're going. And that might sound crazy, but in the long run, you'll thank me because if you are trying to rope drop and you're thinking you're going to be at Peter Pan's flight at 8:30 a.m. and you're getting on a bus at 8:15, it's just not happening. So I would recommend try to get those buses as early as you can, because you're going to get in front of a lot of people that are trying to do those quick, turnarounds to get to the parks in the morning. But that's really going to be the biggest time where you're going to feel the difference in terms of the transportation at a larger resort like that, just because you're going to get a lot of people that are trying to get to one location at that time.
Yeah. Any tips for the Skyliner? That's one area I'm not as much of an expert in.
Yeah, the Skyliner, the biggest thing is that when you come up and, at the beginning of the day, or when you're coming home from Hollywood Studios or EPCOT, you are going to see a line of people. But the thing to remember is that this is continuously moving. So that line of people is going to move a lot faster than it might with a bus, just because you don't have, that time where you have to wait for the transportation. That being said, just get everything ready so that you're ready to go. So with strollers, sometimes they will ask you to collapse the strollers. So I would say, if your child is awake and you can get them out, collapse the stroller, have that ready to go. That's for any transportation. That will just help you to get on a little bit faster. But then also just be prepared for, the first time. So with Pop Century, you are going to stop first at Caribbean Beach, no matter where you're going. So when you get there, you're then going to transfer to another Skyliner. There's going to be one for Epcot and there's going to be one for Hollywood Studios. So just kind of follow the signs. It's very, very easy to read. And with Epcot, it's going to take a little bit longer, like Matt, you were saying before, just because you are going to go through Riviera. So when you get to Riviera, a cast member is going to ask you, where are you going? So if you're like, am I supposed to get up? Do I not get up? They'll tell you. So don't worry. Basically, you're just going to stay seated until you get over to Epcot, and then you'll do the same thing coming back. But Hollywood Studios will just be directly from Caribbean Beach over to Hollywood Studios.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. And you're right. Those lines, I see so many posts about, oh, look at that tremendous Skyliner queue, but it moves. It's essentially an omni-mover in the air. It's continuously moving. So it's certainly different than the bus line might have 30 people. It doesn't look that bad, but you might, 30 people will probably get on. 50 people, you're probably not going to get on that bus. You have to wait for the next one. You don't know when it is, except for waiting for the bus to leave and then seeing what the next time is for the bus to arrive. So
it's like also mental too. How this is going to be, I feel like these are my people, I can say this, but when Walt Disney was doing the Carousel Progress, he wanted it to be seen moving from outside so people knew it was running. It's kind of like that with the Skyliner. You're like, okay, it's running, I'm going to get there. Whereas a bus, you don't see it until it gets there. So it's a whole mental thing. So, but trust me, buses they are, especially in the morning, they're moving those through really quickly.
Yeah. And if you do have more budget for transportation, depending on where you're going, the great thing about staying on property is at a resort like this is you can access minivan service too. So, I know especially at peak times, it could be pricier than off peak times. And it could be harder to get a minivan at some of those early hours when everyone else is trying to get to the theme parks, or end of the day when everyone's coming back. But if you're going to be going to the parks late or coming back midday or heading back early, then minivan is always an option too, which is nice. Really perfect for, again, if you just want that personalized, transportation. It's just you and a cast member in a vehicle going from A to B. Or if you're going to a resort, right? If you have breakfast reservations at, I got to pick some place not on the Skyliner, at Boma, you could just hop on instead of doing a bus transfer at Animal Kingdom and then bus transfer to Jumbo House, just take a minivan straight to Boma, or of course Uber, Lyft, always an option too. So lots of choices, even if you don't want to or can't access bus or Skyliner for some reason. So last question for Pop Century is, why should someone consider staying here? It's the question I always conclude with these episodes.
I think it goes back to, what we were talking about with who is this resort really good for? It's going to be great for families that either are on a budget or want to be on a budget for their accommodations, even if, like we said before, you want to put all your money into experiences that you have in your budget. This is a great option where you have a little bit, you're a little step up from an all-star. And that's not to say that all-stars aren't great resorts. I think they're a great option for some families. But it's just going to give you that added bonus of being able to get to other dining locations, having the Skyliner, like we talked about, being able to select where your room is within the resort based on what type of room you decide to book. But I love this option for young couples and for young families, like, you were saying, Matt, that have two children, or that don't need that added space of a family suite. It's a great resort that feels very Disney and gives you kind of that those added benefits that you get when staying at Disney, but you don't have the cost of staying at a deluxe or some of the moderate resorts. I think it's a great option, especially for families when it's your first visit to Disney, because you're really going to get to experience a lot of what Disney does best here.
You sure do. I love that. I was that young couple that was staying at Pop Century. It checked so many boxes for us. And like I said, we have so many fond memories of staying at Pop Century, and we didn't even spend that much time at the resort. It goes to show it's just what you put into it and who you're with. And it can be such a magical place to be. It doesn't have to be. I think we sometimes put so much pressure on, like, we got to ramp up to those deluxe resorts to really have the most magical stay on earth, but it can all happen at a value resort. And Pop Century is a great example of how I've had so many wonderful memories of staying at Pop Century, and I have a lot of fondness for this resort. And again, you could spend the same budget in a full week at Pop Century that you might otherwise have at a club level stay at a deluxe resort. And so you can really have a vacation on a budget at Disney, staying at Pop Century, and get so many great access to the Skyliner, great dining options for quick service at least, and then Skyliner to other places if you want to eat at Flying Fish or Yachtsman Steakhouse or Topolino's is just a Skyliner ride away. It's a really great place to stay, so always something worth considering. And of course, if someone is ready to book or wants to learn more, I want to send everybody to you, Kelly. So where should people go to be able to work with you on booking this or anything else?
Yeah, so you can reach out to us at kmvtravel.com. Matt does have our information on the website as well as in his bio on Instagram, and I believe linked in the podcast too. So definitely easy to get to us. But if you'd also like to connect with us on Instagram and Facebook, we are KMV Travel Co. And I personally have my Instagram, which is Kelly's Magical Vacations. So if you do come over from the podcast, please reach out. Let me know that you hopped over here from the podcast, and I'd love to hear what you all think about Pop Century too.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure everybody's following you, Kelly. You've traveled more than I do, and you're local to Orlando, so you are in the parks more often than I am. So you're a great resource for seeing what's new beyond just my news episodes and the occasional trips that I take. But Kelly, thank you so much for joining for this episode. I've got, at least one more, like I said, that we're going to have you on shortly, and then we'll have you back for as many of these as possible. But thanks for taking the time to talk about Pop Century.
Thanks for having me. It was great, and I'm excited to hopefully talk to some families about their thoughts on Pop Century too.
Definitely. Welcome back to Imagination Central. As you disembark, please remember to remain fully seated until the podcast comes to a complete stop. Then gather your belongings and watch your head and step as you exit. Also, be sure to check out Kelly's team at KMV Travel, our official travel partner. And thanks again to Kelly for joining me on this episode. You can learn more and get started on your next Disney vacation by heading to kmvtravel.com/skyway, or reach out on social media at KMV Travel and let them know that Imagination Skyway sent you. If you haven't done so already, be sure to also create a free Imagination Skyway account over at patreon.com/Imagination Skyway. I am continuing to turn this into your one-stop shop for all Imagination Skyway content and podcast episodes, videos, and much more. So be sure to create a free account there, or you can consider signing up for our paid subscription options. You can even try that out free for 7 days. You can see what surprises are in store for you there. And if you already have an account, be sure to leave your thoughts about today's discussion directly on this episode in the Patreon app. Remember, you can also engage with the show on social media by searching for Imagination Skyway on your favorite app or heading to imaginationskyway.com. Thank you so much for riding aboard Imagination Skyway, and remember, if we can dream it, we can do it.